Hello, my name is Tricia Wilson-Nguyen. This is my first Flosstube. You might know me from my work on the Plymouth jacket, leading the embroidery of the three-piece ensemble with a fabulous team of experts. Or maybe you have heard of the Cabinet of Curiosities, a set of courses to reproduce embroidered cabinets of the 17th century. This is my cabinet, the Four Seasons cabinet, which I just finished teaching, and took me about 3 years to embroider this. I've been embroidering since I was a little child. I can't remember when I was not embroidering. I think all the women in my family, they do quilting, they did sewing of clothes when I was young, and I think I remember a little plastic hoop about this big where they gave me the needle and I had to do all of the little long stitches in the hoop. And somewhere around elementary school, my mom needed to take some time away from me and my brothers, and so she became a founding member of the Embroiderers Guild of America in Lansing, Michigan, and went to some of the meetings in order to kind of, I guess, get away from us. And over time, she was doing the projects from the meetings, and she would put them down in order to maybe go to cook dinner, take care of my brothers or something like that, and apparently I had been watching her and was quite interested in what she was doing. So I may have just picked up her work and thought I knew what I was doing and continued on the stitching. Well, you know what happened. She caught me. She figured out, I don't know how, that I had been embroidering on her pieces. And so she gave me a piece of large scale Aida to do the same project that she had been doing herself. And I even have that today. Can you believe that? I still have that piece. I kind of can't believe that I haven't put it into a frame or put it into like an ornament or something like that. Back looks pretty awful. You compare and you're like, yes, there's hope for me. So that's how I got started in embroidery. So I wanted to learn more, and what she would do is she would bring me to the guild meetings. And she'd pretend that her babysitter had kind of not come, to take care of me because children were not allowed at the meetings. And they would say finally, oh, she can play in the corner. And I would just kind of hurry myself up to the table and get a needle and actually do the projects that they were doing. But they caught us, they figured it out that I was trying to come to the meetings, and they said, nope, no children at the meetings, which was kind of too bad. So I kind of concocted a plan with my mom that I would enter this big contest. And by that time, I was starting to do hardanger. And I had this big hardanger runner that I worked all year long to enter this contest. It was a whole state thing. It was kind of a combination of a science fair and an art fair. And I did win the embroidery section, which the Broiderers Guild actually judged. And I won the best of show. So they had a really hard time not letting me into the guild at that point, which they did. And within a year, I was teaching hardanger to some of the ladies. And I have to really appreciate them doing that and also giving me my first taste of teaching embroidery, which was kind of nice. I'm not sure how well I did, but at least they gave me the experience. So at some point, I think I ran out of things to do. My mom really there wasn't a lot being published at the time. Hardanger was kind of at the top of the rung of what was being published, what people were teaching. And this is like, the early 80s. And so my mom didn't know what to do with me because I was really kind of obsessive and wanted to learn. And so she decided that she would take me to see Chez Pendray. And this is really when my big embroidery journey started. I was introduced to Chez Pendray, and I don't know if you know who she is, but Chez is one of the first of many grand dames of embroidery that have helped me along in my career. There are many giants of embroidery that you may not know, and that's kind of the point of my video series here, is the stories behind the embroidery. They could be stories about women in the 20th century who've brought techniques back to life or who have taught generations of teachers and students that are currently doing wonderful things today. Those women who have brought techniques back from the past, the women of the past, who made things like these cabinets in the 1700s, or the samplers that we all like to reproduce today. There's stories there. There's the pattern drafters. There's the people making the threads. There's stories of everybody, and I really want to bring some of those stories out, and especially some of the unsung heroes in the embroidery world, because of course women's stories are often not told. So in some ways, my YouTube channel is almost like a giant thank you letter to some of these giants of the embroidery world who have helped me, or saw an enthusiastic young girl and decided to teach me something. So back to Shea Pendray. Shea owned a famous needlework store called Needle Arts in Dearborn, Massachusetts. And she had just, when I met her, she had just gotten back from Japan, where she had been part of an initial group who had learned Japanese embroidery and were going to become teachers of Japanese embroidery. So let's back up to why Japanese embroidery. The Kurnikai Professional Workshop in the 1980s had gone through ebbs and flows of their business. These were where some of the living treasures were. They were having difficulties because of modernization of Japan. Women weren't wearing the fancy embroidered obis with the kimono anymore. And so they were having a hard time in this professional workshop getting enough work to do. So they decided that they would teach Japanese women to make their own obis. And that became a really profitable venture for them. And one expat woman who was there in Japan, who was American, begged and begged to try to be one of the students, finally was allowed, and then other Americans found out about it and asked to be taught as well. And pretty quickly, it was obvious that the American and British market would be a huge boon for Kurnikai, and so much so that actually the current master, who was the son-in-law of the master at the time, now lives in the United States at the Japanese Embroidery Center in Atlanta. And this has been a way for them to keep their tradition alive by teaching American, well, Western, and other Eastern women and men how to embroider in their particular style. So Shea took a look at my Hardanger embroidery and immediately told my mother she's going to be a Japanese embroiderer. And as long as I would come there every once in a while, she would teach me Japanese embroidery. And in fact, there are quite a few pieces that I have done around here. Shea taught me for a long time, between about 12 and 16, 17 years old. And then I went away to college and I came back for graduate school, and she became a mentor of mine again, and I studied under her for several more years. You may know Shea from her PBS series, Needle Art Studio. And in fact, she came and filmed an entire episode when I was working on the Plymouth jacket. So Japanese embroidery has a direct line to this particular Travels with Tricia topic. The Japanese have great reverence for materials, and they understand how not only to use them, but their composition and how they're made. So when you're learning the embroidery techniques, you learn to become masters of the materials and understand them. So it really isn't a surprise that years later, when I came upon this gold and silver thread embroidered jacket, I was just gobsmacked, and I had to understand the making of Western gold threads. In this picture, you can see that I'm actually examining it. This is, I think, the 4th or 5th time I've examined this particular jacket with friend and fellow gold thread teacher, Chris Berry, who was recently in Boston. And we had quite a bit of fun that day with the curators. This brings me to a visit to the 400th anniversary exhibition for the Worshipful Company of Gold and Silver Wire Drawers. It was in London, and it is still going. I was lucky to see it in November and find out that particular day that the exhibition was going to be extended to the end of the year. So if you happen to be near London or traveling through Britain or something like that before the end of the year, stop, go to London and see this exhibition. You can still see it. If you can't do that and you enjoy what you see in this video, you can also still get the catalog of the exhibition for £16, and I will put links to where you can get this in the notes of this video. So I hope you enjoy the virtual visit to the gallery in Guildhall, and if you like this, there are a lot more videos like this coming, so please subscribe. The Gold and Silver Wire Drawers is the guild established by a royal charter of James I in 1623.
It covers the makers and merchants who drew wire for several purposes, much of it being for making embroidery threads. The exhibit is being held in the gallery space adjacent to the historic Guildhall in central London. I have to thank the current Guildmaster, Catherine Carr, and the first woman to hold this position for giving me permission to film in the exhibit and share it with you. The Worshipful Company of Gold and Silver Wire Drawers was firmly established in London by the 15th century as a protected English trade. By the early 16th century, their status and position was so high that they worked directly for King Henry VIII. Wire drawers accompanied the king in 1520 to the famous tournament, the Field of Cloth of Gold, named after its many gold wire pavilions. In 1623, the company received its first royal charter from King James I. The Worshipful Company of Gold and Silver Wire Drawers continues to support the ancient wire trade of wire drawing. The basic manufacture is twofold. First, a bar is drawn through a series of smaller and smaller holes in draw plates. It can be drawn to the width of a human hair. Second, often it is flattened and spirally wrapped around a core of silk to make embroidery thread. Near the beginning of the exhibit, there are wire drawing tools as well as images of wire drawing and gold beading from earlier periods. A fabulous example embroidery provided by the Royal School of Embroidery is this sampler of gold threads. There is no standard terminology for gold threads, and the numbers associated with them, such as number 3 pearl, are specific sizes to each company and really designate the number of the needle that they have in a variable size set manufactured at some point in past history. So the number 3 of one company will not be the same as a number 3 at another, which can be kind of frustrating to us all. There is a move amongst conservators to come up with a uniform way of describing these threads and measuring their sizes so better analytic papers can be written about embroidery. This particular Royal School sampler has been considered among the working group on this question as a starting point. The first amazing piece of embroidery you see is the Fishmonger's Pail, dated between 1512 and 1530. These pieces were hearse cloths used for covering distinguished liverymen's coffins. Incorporated by Royal Charter in 1272, the Guild's role was in standards for trading of fish and shellfish. They were one of the original 12 merchant trade guilds to be formed. This is an extraordinary example of opus Anglicum, otherwise known as English work. It describes the combination of exquisitely detailed split-stitch embroidery with very fine filament silk threads. And the backgrounds of this type of embroidery are worked with gold and silver threads that are couched onto the surface over sometimes padded cords or using reverse couching to create patterns. Reverse couching is distinct from regular couching as the needle enters the fabric in the same hole as it came up in, pulling the gold thread just slightly to the back, creating a divot on the top instead of a visible couch thread. This gives the stitcher more control over the patterns created. Patterns such as this cross-hatching behind the soldier are made by making longer distances between the couching stitches so the gold floats above the surface, whereas in other areas the couching stitches are more dense and so the shine is dulled, creating the pattern. The mermen and mermaids obviously relate to the lore around fishing vessels. You could be distracted by the embroidery and not notice that the top of the altar cloth is an incredibly rare piece of gold velvet. I visited the only Venetian factory where this type of raised velvet can be made today, incorporating flattened gold like the background of this piece. But while they can produce the velvet with the loops in silk, no one is currently doing velvet with gold loops. That is just mind-blowing. Hopefully, I will do some more video on the Venice research and trips that I've been making at some point. I have to admit that after seeing the Fishmonger's Pail, I could have just left and been happy because it is a true masterpiece of gold thread embroidery. I had heard about it and I was blown away by it. But there was so much more in the exhibition. The Bacton altar cloth is dated between 1590 and 1610 and has been in the news a lot because of recent publications which link it to Elizabeth I. It is currently thought to be the only surviving dress of Elizabeth I. There are records of dresses and other textiles given to her courtiers, but the legend is that this was given to Blanche Parry, who was chief gentlewoman and keeper of Her Majesty's jewels. Parry, who never married, remained devoted to Elizabeth and was her longest-serving courtier for 56 years before retiring to the village of Bacton. There, the dress was later recycled into an altar cloth. Made of cream-colored silk and Italian cloth of silver, elaborately embroidered in silk, silver, and gold thread, it was stitched straight onto the fabric, indicating pretty good workmanship. Cloth of silver was under sumptuary law reserved for members of the royal family, which was an early clue of its origin. The gold and silver wire drawers contributed to the cost of its conservation by textile conservators from the historic royal palace at Hampton Court. The next amazing sets of embroideries are actually reconstructions of several crowns for masters and wardens of two companies. Each were damaged during their long life, such as the bombings during World War II. I managed to film the crowns for the master and wardens of the Girdlers Company. The crowns are worn at the installation of a new master and wardens on other ceremonial occasions. These are 20th century reconstructions by the Royal School of Needlework from the 15th century examples. But I didn't get the Broiderers Guild crown. I just have to kick myself that I forgot to go back to it after being distracted, as one of the guild wardens wanted to talk to me and show me details of a different object. Why am I so distressed not to show it to you? Well, because Cynthia Jackson of Gutter Lane Embroidery was commissioned to make the reproduction of the piece and did a meticulous job, publishing the entire process in the Medieval Clothing and Textiles Journal. This documentation is a standard for doing such work. I have put the reference in the notes so you can look up the article if interested. She also has it on her website and published in Inspirations magazine. Those references will also be in the notes. This next piece is the actual embroidered coats of arms for the Gold and Silver Wyre Company, made in 1923 by 5 of the court assistants to commemorate the first royal charter of James I in 1625. It ingeniously demonstrates all the range of techniques of drawn wire used in embroidery. This is one of the finest examples of 20th century gold and silver wire work. The Latin motto is an amusing pun that translates to "Love draws friendship." Right next to the seal is the burse of the Great Seal of England of the Lord Keeper, Sir Orlando Bridgeman, from the 17th century. It is decorated with gold and silver wire in couched work and has the crowned royal cipher and the letters CR for Carolus Rex for King Charles II. This impressive burse or ceremonial bag contained the Great Seal and would have been carried publicly in procession in London as a symbol of royal authority. Every Lord Chancellor commissioned a new burse to be made, and you can tell whose is who by the initials first of the king or queen that are at the top, which then limits the time period you're looking at, and then by the shield in the middle, which is the arms of the Lord Chancellor who had had that particular burse made for them. These are absolutely stunning and amazing pieces of embroidery because of the three-dimensionality of them in all of the gold and silver threads. From examining some at the Cleveland Museum of Art, I can see that underneath the shield and other pieces, there is layers of glued on paper that has stiffened that particular material that has been embroidered, and that helps it stand up as it is. And then there are wooden forms inside of some of the embroidery, and that is mind-boggling how to go about doing that. Now to the 20th century, we have Queen Mary's coronation dress from 1911. Made of cream-colored silk satin and embroidered with gold thread and tiny gilt metal beads, the sleeves being of handmade bobbin lace out of gold. It was worn by Queen Mary at her coronation with King George V at Westminster Abbey in June of 1911. It was designed by Reville and Ruster and decorated by the Princess Louise Needlework School and the Ladies' Work Society. The embroiderers used gold thread in a symbolic design of English oak leaves and acorns, the Tudor rose, Scottish thistle, Irish shamrock, and the lotus and star of India, and a border of waves at the hem representing the oceans connecting the British Empire. This dress was of high interest to people, including illustrators who were drawing many of the items on site when I was there. You can imagine in an exhibit like this, there are going to be quite a few chasubles to look at. This one is a 19th century one called the Woodor chasuble. It is really, it's been made up of 2 different lost vestments that were in Westminster Abbey. The Flemish orphreys in the middle are 15th century, and they have the arms of Duke Charles the Bold of Burgundy. It was probably a gift from the Duke's wife, Margaret of York, to Westminster Abbey. Scenes of Christ's life are shown. The other lost vestment is a 16th century one and has Henry VIII's emblems, the Tudor rose, portcullis, and pomegranate of Queen Catherine of Aragon, probably another royal gift to Westminster Abbey. But the ornée work on this piece is just beautiful. Ornée is the technique where you are putting couching stitches over the gold in colored silk very close together so that they look covered and that the gold is colored. And if you do that in a pattern, you can start to make folds in what looks like folds in the gold thread embroidery. This section of the exhibition was centered on professional work, including the royal household and royal muse. I have been in conversations with some of the many professional houses who make things like the ciphers, badges, gloves, etc. The death of Queen Elizabeth I put the two companies making gold threads in England into overdrive, Golden Threads and Benton & Johnson. Not only were their threads needed for the livery for the funeral, but all new ciphers needed to be made for the coronation of King Charles III. Recently, our beloved William Kentish Barnes of Golden Threads and the longest maker of gold threads in the UK, tracing his family of wire drawers way, way back, retired and sold his business to Alex Birdwood, just in time for Alex to be asked to make nearly 200 meters of number 3 and number 4 pearl just for one cipher embroiderer. I have to secretly be happy that this is all over, as many of my threads on order for projects were put aside, not a surprise, by all involved to rush to meet the needs of the royal household. A series of banners, 2 of which are shown here, showed beautiful mastery of couching of gold threads. The first is the banner of H.R.H. George, Duke of Kent, as Grand Master. The lions with the swirling couching are mesmerizing. The second of St. Mellitus is double-sided and was worked in 1895, possibly made for the St. Dunstan's Chapel for the Bishop of London. It is not a surprise that a piece designed and managed by Beryl Dean would be in the exhibition, a giant of 20th century embroidery. The Jubilee cope was constantly crowded in the exhibition. The cope and mitre was worn by the Right Reverend and Right Honourable Richard Chartres, Bishop of London, at the Diamond Jubilee Thanksgiving service in 2012 after a detailed conservation project. The cope was originally given to St. Paul's Cathedral to mark the Queen's Silver Jubilee in 1977. It depicts the spires of 73 London churches, 3 royal peculiars, and St. Paul's Cathedral. Beryl Dean, MBE, was a giant of 20th century church and contemporary embroidery inspired by old techniques. She was educated at the Royal School of Embroidery and the Bromley School of Art, holding many positions such as head of the Royal School of Embroidery, senior lecturer at University of Durham, head of a couture studio, etc., etc. She led a modernization of ecclesiastical embroidery for decades and trained dozens of embroiderers, such as our own Mary Brooks, who later became the head of the Textile Conservation Center and is a collaborator of mine, from the University of Durham. I have heard countless wisdoms and stories about Beryl Dean from those whom I admire. There is a website where you can explore her life put together by the Beryl Dean Trust. A selection of famous theatrical costumes, including those from Shakespeare and the ballet, were joined by more mainstream pieces from the Crown, including the painted and embroidered TV gown made to emulate the coronation dress of Elizabeth II. Dress uniforms and banners for regiments of the British Isles always have had high-quality gold threads used, especially the Navy, which regulates the highest percentage of gold because of saltwater corrosion. It was fun to see the detailed work on cuffs and collars, as well as regiments like the Highlanders spelled out in thread. These items are very important as they provide the work needed to keep our gold thread makers working so the smaller hobby embroidery market can get the variety of threads we do. Today, the company provides awards for outstanding workmanship in the modern usage of gold and silver wire and thread, and seeks to encourage young people working with gold and silver wire to connect to the company. In the area of embroidery, they continue to support the trade by sponsoring scholarships and awards to such organizations as the Royal School of Needlework, the Glasgow School of Art, the Guildhall School of Music, Goldsmiths Crafts and Design Awards, Hand and Lock, Bishop's Land, St. Paul's Cathedral, Royal Ballet School, as well as others. So I hope you liked the visit to the 400th anniversary of the gold and silver wire drawers. If you enjoy it, there's a lot more travels with Tricia coming up, so please subscribe.